everyone, Kelly here, and today I wanted to wrap up the things that I read in March. Just so you know, since I knew I was going to read a lot in this month because middle grade March, I did do a mid-month wrap-up and a new releases wrap-up, and that was the books that I had read that came out in 2021. So I'll link those down below. So these are just going to be the books I read in the second half of the month, and ones that were not brand new releases. And I ended up really picking up my reading in the second half of the month. I was kind of slow in the beginning of March because I was just distracted a lot, but I have 13 books to talk about, so obviously read a lot in the second half. I just got really into all the stuff that was happening around middle grade March, like the Discord and the discussions online, the live discussions and things like that, that I just like really jumped into middle grade in the second half of the month. And I mean, it turned out really well because out of these 13 things, I only gave 2 things under a 4-star, and there's a couple I didn't rate, and I'll talk about those first. So I'm going to go on the order, I'll talk about the things I didn't rate, and then from my 2-star on up to a 5-star at the end. So first, the 3 books that I didn't rate, all of these are ones that I read to my daughter as part of homeschool. And so they are targeted at even younger audience than middle grade, I would say. My daughter is 6, and so some of the middle grade things just have like are too much to read aloud to her right now. So these are more lower elementary, and it just usually with picture books or those that are targeted more that lower elementary, I don't always rate those because they're not necessarily stuff I would pick up myself if I wasn't reading them to her. So the first one was Bob by Wendy Mass and Rebecca Stead. And this one, a lot of people do read this as a middle grade novel with older kids, but I felt like there was nothing inappropriate in here that couldn't be read to somebody under the age of 8 or 9, because usually middle grade is like 8 or 9 through 12, 13 range. And so this definitely can be read with kids around 5 or 6, and it is perfectly fine. She loved this book. This is about a girl named Livy who goes to visit her grandmother in Australia, and I think she's 11 in this book, and she hasn't been back to see her grandmother since she was 5. And there is this thing in a chicken suit, this like goblin looking almost guy. If you want to see like on the cover, you see like it's this little creature that's green, and then he's wearing this like fake chicken suit, and he's in her closet, and she's like, "Where did you come from?" And his name is Bob, and Bob's like, "You don't remember me?" And they were friends back when she was 5, and she didn't remember him. And so this whole story is her trying to figure out, like, where did Bob come from? Why is he in her grandmother's closet? Why did he appear when she was 5 years old and all that stuff? And this was a sweet book. There are like moments in the book where you think that maybe something really bad happened when she was little because you can't remember it. But I'll just let you know, for parents, don't worry. There's nothing in here that would like be bad for a younger child. So it's not like it's building up to this big like reveal of some scary thing, because sometimes there were moments in here I'm like, oh, should I read ahead to make sure it's okay for my daughter? It was perfectly fine for a 5 or 6 year old. It just really is more like a childhood book, and I think it was really a fun book to read together. It is a book that I didn't find as an adult like completely compelling. Like, I think I would have found it a little boring if I was just reading it on my own, but reading it out loud, my daughter really enjoyed the character Bob. We had fun doing like the voices and stuff like that. So I would recommend it as a read aloud, but I don't necessarily would recommend it generally to an adult audience. And then the next one is Jeremy, The Tale of an Honest Bunny by Jan Karon. And Jan Karon, I don't know if I'm saying her name right, but she's a really popular author of adult Christian fiction. I've never read any of her adult books, but my mom got me this book, and it's definitely like a read aloud type book. It has lots of pictures. It's definitely very reminiscent of almost like Beatrix Potter kind of stories with like it's starring a bunny, and it's just about this bunny who is a stuffed bunny that was made by somebody, and he needs to get to his new owner and just the people he meets along the way and stuff like that. This is another one I wouldn't necessarily read this as an adult, like it's very basic, but it was really sweet reading it to my daughter. She loved all the people they met. It's a sweet story. I would kind of recommend this for people that like The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane but think it's too old and has too many serious things for their younger kids. Like, this is great for like my 3-year-old loved it. So even like the 3 to like 7-year-old range. And then when they're ready for some more of those more difficult topics that are in that book, you can move to that book. So this is very similar in the fact that it's a stuffed animal going on a journey and things like that. So really good for really little kids. There is Christian stuff in this book, like talked about, like there's Bible verses talked about and stuff like that, in case you like that in your read alouds or you don't. So just a warning. And the last one in this category that I didn't rate that's for younger audiences is Dragonbreath by Ursula Vernon. I didn't actually read this aloud to my daughter. I was testing it out to see if it's something I want to get for her and read to her. And because like online it said the age group for this was 8 to 12, but this is definitely something that can be read to a younger audience. This was a lot of fun. There's a lot of sarcastic humor. It's about this little dragon that goes to school. He's the only dragon at his school. Everybody else is like a reptile or an amphibian. So he feels a little out of place. And then he also feels out of place in his family because he can't breathe fire. And so his parents are kind of pressuring him to be able to breathe fire, and he just hasn't been able to do it yet. And in this one, he's at school at the beginning and forgets to do a paper and does a really like bad last minute job. And then to do a redo, he goes down into the sea, because the whole point of the paper was to write about the ocean. And so he and his friend take a trip to the ocean to learn more about it so he can rewrite his paper. And so it's just like fun and interesting little trip to the sea. And I think this is one of those that would be great as a read aloud to your kid, because as an adult I found it really funny and interesting to read. So you know, sometimes you're reading to your kids and you're like, oh, this is so boring, like why, like you just don't really find some of the read alouds interesting. But this is one that I would definitely like enjoy reading to my daughter. So I think I'm gonna wait till next year because she isn't really in the school setting yet. I think this is one that once she's in the school setting, it will make more sense and be more fun for her. So next year when she goes to first grade, I'll definitely be getting this whole series from the library and reading them to her, because as an adult, I found them very humorous. Just so you know, Ursula Vernon, she also writes older stories. She writes fantasy for young adult and adults, but she writes them under her pen name T. Kingfisher, which I have reviewed one of her books before. And the reason she changed that has a pen name is because she has a lot of these like young comic kind of thing. They're like a combination of like comic book and then like text. And she has a lot of these for younger kids, and she didn't want like younger kids picking up her stuff meant for adults. So in case you didn't know, Ursula Vernon and T. Kingfisher are the same person. And now on to the two books I didn't like. I need to speed this up because I have a lot of books to talk about. So I gave 2 stars to The Fairy's Return and Other Princess Tales by Gail Carson Levine, which was really disappointing because I love a lot of Gail Carson Levine's books, but this one was my least favorite. I will probably be getting rid of this book after this. This is a collection of 6 stories that are princess tales, and like from the back it made it seem like it's like she's taking your favorite fairy tales and giving a new spin to them. And so I was expecting them to be like, I don't know, more modernized and maybe a little like feminist and all that stuff, but no, like yes, it is a retelling, and yes, it's a little different and a little quirky compared to the other ones, but it's still like every single one of these stories was about a princess trying to find someone to marry, like whether it's her choice to be married or her parents' choice, but it's like finding a prince and settling down and getting married. And that's the whole point of each story. And that's to me not really twisting around the old tales. It's not really something I want to pass on to my kids. Part of the reason I don't read fairy tales usually to my kids is because I don't like this whole thing that we are instilling in our girls that they have to have a boy or man prince in order to be their story to be complete. And this wasn't what I wanted. I found them really boring. I know they are written to a younger audience, like they're written more for probably the 6 to 9 year old range, but I think that this is like compared to this where I'm like, oh, I could read Dragonbreath and enjoy reading this with my daughter or Bob. This one, I was like, I would just be bored reading this to my daughter. I was bored reading it to myself, and like also not really wanting to just perpetuate the same like princess needs a prince to move on. So yeah, I didn't enjoy this. 2 stars. There was like maybe like a couple stories I liked, so that's why I didn't give it 1 star, but otherwise I would pass. And then the next book is Prairie Lotus by Linda Sue Park, and I gave this 3 stars, which was really disappointing to me. I really wanted to love this book. Linda Sue Park wrote this book because when she was younger, she loved the Little House on the Prairie books, but being of Korean descent, she didn't like some of the racist things that come up in those books. And, you know, as someone who read I read Little House in the Big Woods to my 6-year-old at the beginning of the school year, and I had to kind of edit out some. In that book, there's only just a couple minor things that I had to edit out because I just did not want to like put it in there. And I've heard that some of the racist things come up more as you go on the series. So I was like, oh, well, maybe this is one I can read to my daughter and not have to worry about that. But I just didn't find this to be that interesting of a story, which was really sad. So this is about a girl named Hannah, and her mother passed away. Her mother was Chinese and her father is a white man, and they were married in California, and this is taking place in 1880. And so it wasn't necessarily approved for a white man to marry a Chinese woman at that time. And so they had Hannah, and then her mother dies, and her dad wants to go move towards the middle of the country. I think they are moving to the Dakota territory. So they're moving to the middle of the country to kind of settle and have a store there. But moving to that area, you know, most of the Chinese immigrants are in the West at this time. And so the farther east she moves, the more like she encounters a lot of racist thoughts and ideas and people not really wanting her around. And so they're settling in this town finally and wanting to be part of the community. And so she is trying to go to the school, and there are people that are having problems with her going to school with their kids and all this stuff. And I think that it's probably an accurate portrayal of everything that was happening at the time. And then just in terms of reading it to my kids or my personal enjoyment, I just didn't find much in the story. Like it's not that I don't want there to be like her having trouble fitting in and her having all the problems with the people in the area judging her. Like I totally understand why that's in the book and everything. And I wouldn't want to take that out, but I wanted to connect to her more and connect to her family more. But her dad, like, I think this might have worked out better if her dad was more supportive. But her dad is not very supportive of her. And I think that that's kind of what makes it harder. Like, I'm not connecting to this family and these characters to, like, want to, like, see her through all her struggles. Like, there was nothing that made me want to keep going. And then 3/4 the way through, there's a big content warning that I didn't know about, and in terms of reading this to my child, that won't be happening for many years because of this content warning. I'll let you know what it is, because as a parent or even as an adult reading this, I wish I had known this was in there, but it does happen later in the book, so I'll put a little spoiler here. I'm just going to tell you the content warning, not what happens with it. But at 3/4 of the way through this book, there is a sexual assault against her. So yeah, which for me, now we're going back to spoiler free. I won't mention what that content was again, but to have that level of content in a book meant for younger children, it just wasn't something I would want to read to them when they're young. And so I would say this is upper middle grade for that content. Yeah, I still think it's good that there is representation out there of what it was like to be Asian at this time in history. I think that that's good. So I gave it 3 stars because I do think it's important that this book is out there. I just didn't really enjoy my experience reading this book, or find it very compelling, I should say, because sometimes you don't have to enjoy something if there's hard struggles in it, but I at least want to be compelled to like see through what's going on in her life, and it just didn't really pull me in as much as I wanted it to. All right, now we're moving on to my 4 stars. I have like so many 4 stars, and like I said, I need to start talking faster. So I'm going to try to just be really brief about each of these. So the first one is Escape from Mr. Lemoncello's Library by Chris Grabenstein. And this is about a group of kids who win this contest to be able to be the first ones to experience this brand new library that was built by a man who designs games. And so once they're there, they then have to try to escape the library in order to win a prize. And it's fun if you are someone who enjoys like board games or word games or puzzles and things like that. This was a fun one. It's not one that I really want to continue the series or read over and over again, but it was enjoyable for the first time reading experience. And next is Small Spaces by Katherine Arden. This is a first in a series. I think so far there are 2 books out and there's a 3rd coming out soon. And these are like spooky, creepy middle grade, and I'm really into that right now. I'm just loving the like creepy middle grade. It's even like blurbed up here by R.L. Stine as terrifying and fun. And I wouldn't call this terrifying, but I do think it's got creepy elements, Halloween-y kind of stuff. It's about a girl named Ollie who she's down by the river one day, which is her kind of special spot, and she sees this woman crying and trying to throw a book into the river. She saves the book and starts reading it and discovers kind of a mystery, and then her and some friends are on a field trip to this farm and get kind of sucked into an adventure of their own, and it's all about like making new friends, dealing with grief, and also some creepy things happening. And I did find it creepy, but it wasn't to the level of like being like all out scared or anything like that. So it's kind of the perfect like mild creepy. If you're not somebody that can really do horror, this might be a fun one. It was definitely a fun adventure. And then next I have I Can Make This Promise by Christine Day. And this is about a girl, what's her name? Edie, who her mother was adopted, and her mother is from a Native American family, and then adopted into a white family. And Edie never knew about her Native American ancestors because she always thought her mother didn't know anything, that it was like a closed adoption. She didn't know anything. But then one day she's looking for something in the attic and finds a box from her mother's birth mother. And so her grandmother from the Native American side. And so it kind of is just her exploring that part of her heritage. And I thought this was a really sweet book. This is definitely, I think, one that is very simplistic in its story. So it could be something that younger kids could grab onto, like just kind of following Edie and friendships and life and finding out kind of more about your family and things like that. But the end does get a little more serious. So it might be one that you would want to read with your kids to kind of discuss what happened to a lot of Native American families back in like before the 70s, when adoptions were not on the up and up when it came to Native American families. I don't you don't want to like necessarily spoil the ending of a book, but this is based on history, so you can always also look up what happened at that time period and things like that to know what I'm talking about. But I don't want to like say it explicitly because I don't want to necessarily spoil the end of a book for people. But I do think this is a really great book about that time in history. And next is Red Leaves by Sita Brahmachari, and this mainly follows two young people. So we have Aisha, who was a refugee from Somalia, and she has been living in this foster family for a while. Like, she was moved around from different foster families, and now she is living with this woman named Liliana, and they've been together for a while. And Liliana comes to her and says they have a family that wants to adopt her, and Aisha's feeling a little betrayed, thinking that she was going to stay with Liliana and for the rest of her childhood, and she doesn't want to be passed on to another family, and so she decides to run away. And then Zach is the other one we're following. He is dealing with his parents' divorce, is in process, and also his mother, who he lives with, is a foreign correspondent, so she's gone a lot, helping children around the world, through her journalism. And he's kind of upset about a lot of these things of her job and being gone and the divorce. And so he runs away. And then Aisha and Zach find each other in the woods, and kind of they're growing as people about what is going on with their issues and kind of dealing with them, helping each other out. And then they also run into a girl named Iona, who is a girl who has been on her own, living on the street for many years. And then the fourth person that kind of shows up in this book is an elderly homeless woman. So all four of these people kind of meet each other in the woods, and what happens during that time, and like their kind of ways of becoming almost like a found family and interacting with each other and things like that. And this is one that moves kind of slow because it's very character driven, and for a while I was like, am I loving this? Do I enjoy it? And then by the time I got to the end, I was actually crying because I just really felt connected to these characters and what they were going through and stuff like that. So I do think this is a really great book, and obviously has a lot of different thing like diversity in the people that are in here, and even the side characters, like so much diversity and ethnicity and religion and backgrounds and things like that. So I would recommend this highly to middle grade students or adults who really like a character driven novel. And then next I read One Crazy Summer by Rita Williams-Garcia. This is the beginning of, I think it's a trilogy at this point, about these three sisters. This takes place in 1968, is that right? So these three sisters were, their mother left them when the youngest one was a baby, and so they haven't seen her or heard from her for most of their lives. And then their dad decides it's time for them to get to know their mother. So he sends them to California for the summer to spend time with their mother. And Delphine is the oldest one, and she's the only one that really remembers her mother at all. And the mom doesn't really want them there. And so she sends them to kind of this day camp that is run by the Black Panthers. So they're learning more about the Black Panthers movement, and they're kind of just trying to figure out and navigate this relationship with their mother, why their mother left, all these things. And there's another that's more on the character-driven side. I did really love these sisters and their relationship with each other. Delphine, had to kind of grow up young because her mother left, and she was kind of the one that was always made to be like in charge of her younger sisters. And so you just see her, especially in this book, how much she does for her family and how much she has to step up. And she's only like 10 or 11 in this book, and I think it's like she's 10 at the beginning. And yeah, I just really wanted to give these children a hug. And I did like the arc of the story with their mother, and also like it was very interesting to learn about things that were happening at that time with the Black Panthers and how kids were involved in the movement and things like that. So I did really end up enjoying this book, giving it 4 stars, and I'm interested to see what the next one is, because it seems like each book in the story has kind of a issue that it's surrounding. So this one was about the Black Panther movement, but then I think each one has a different thing around this time period, the 60s, early 70s, that it revolves around. So I'm interested to see how the next one and what topic it approaches. And then next I read Mulan Before the Sword by Grace Lin. And what this is a prequel that I think Disney must have come to Grace Lin and asked her to write a prequel to the Mulan. And this could be like, you don't have to have watched the new live action to do this. I mean, it's the same kind of characters that you would have remembered from the original animated movie, because this is taking place when Mulan is young. I think she's probably around like 12. I'm not for sure, but around that age. And her sister gets bitten by a poisonous spider, and she needs to go and find the antidote. And so she, along with this rabbit who is not just a rabbit, there's more to the story, they go to find the antidote and the things that they need to save her sister. So it's definitely a quest story, adventure story, and I found this really entertaining. I love Grace Lin's fantasy writing. I say fantasy writing because I didn't necessarily love Year of the Dog. I think it's great for kids, but I wasn't like really into the whole I don't really love reading books that just follow kids at school. Like as an adult, I don't find that interesting, but I love her fantasy writing, because the way she does it is, she's got the main storyline that you're following, like with Mulan and on this quest, and then there's little snippets of stories within the story that are like folk tales or myths and things like that. And I read the author's note, and she actually based a lot of the stories that were told and some of the characters that she meets in this book off of real figures from Chinese history or from folklore and mythology. So I think that's really interesting. You can learn a lot about the Chinese folklore at the same time as reading a fun adventure story and following a character that a lot of us as children really loved. And she does talk about in her author's note that when Mulan came out, she was an adult, but that it was just really exciting for her to see an Asian heroine in a Disney movie, and that kind of was one of the things that inspired her to research more about Chinese folklore and mythology and put that stuff in her writing. So I just thought that was really great in the author's note to learn about that. I would recommend this as a fun thing. I think also this could be a great read aloud with older kids, since it has no pictures and it's longer. I wouldn't read it with my 6-year-old, but I think this would be great for an 8-year-old that might have more focused time to do read alouds. This would be a fun one for our family to read together, because it just is, it is predictable in the fact that it's we get, like any quest story, we get into a problem that we have to solve and we solve it. And then we move on to the next thing that, has to be dealt with, and we solve that. Obviously most middle grade quest stories follow the same pattern, but I do just love Mulan as a character in this and her strength. And obviously this is before she knows that she's going to go to war. This is just her as a girl, just trying to help her family. And then the last 4-star book is Before the Ever After by Jacqueline Woodson, and this is written in verse, so you could see like it's more like poetry. And this is about a young boy, ZJ, who his father was a professional football player and really popular. And then his father starts to get really bad headaches and starts forgetting things, and his personality changes a little bit. This takes place in 1999. So this is before doctors figured out the connection between football and lots of concussions and brain trauma. And so this family just doesn't know what's happening. None of the doctors can diagnose what's going on with his father. And so it's just what ZJ and his mother are dealing with, seeing his father change day by day. And it is really heartbreaking, but at the same time, there's like hopeful moments and just like beautiful to see how he and his mother support each other and support his dad. And yeah, I think it's beautiful for a loving family. There's also, ZJ has three friends that are like a really close-knit group of friends, and it was just beautiful to see how they support each other, because ZJ is not the only one in that group of friends that's going through something in their personal life, and just the way these 4 boys like really support each other and love each other as friends, and like are helping each other day by day to get through the hard things. This was beautiful. I actually shed a few tears in this one because it's just beautifully written and a great story. So I would highly recommend this one. And the last one I want to talk about is my only 5-star in this group of books, and that is The Night Gardener by Jonathan Auxier. And I buddy read this with Kara from Wild Book Garden, and we both really enjoyed it. I don't know if it was a 5-star for her. It might have been a little lower, but we did really just enjoy the reading experience, reading it together. And this is what got me like really wanting to read all of the creepy middle grade. So I read Small Spaces after I read this one, and then I went out and bought a bunch of creepy middle grade books. So you'll see that haul at some point. I might wait till closer to the fall to show them all, because I'm gathering them in, and I'll probably just spend the fall reading a bunch of creepy middle grade books, because I just love it, because I can't handle like adult horror that has a lot of gore and blood and you just don't know how far it's going to go. But you know, in middle grade horror that it's not going to go that far, but you might still get creeped out. And that's what I loved about this book. There was moments that it was like shocking and like, oh gosh, like some of this is like really kind of creeping me out a little bit, but I loved it. I love the story also and the characters. This is about 2 siblings from Ireland who, this is during the like, what is it called? The Great Potato Famine in Ireland. And so they have to leave Ireland. And so they go to England and they start to work in this crumbling manor house as servants. And something is not right with the people they work for, the family, and with the house. Just more and more things are happening that just don't feel like it's all okay there. Like something's going on. And as it goes, it just more and more creepy things happen. And one day they even encounter in the night a mysterious stranger that they don't know where he came from and how he's connected to the house. And yeah, lots of creepy vibes, but I also just love the characters. I love the siblings, their like relationship, and also their arc through the story. Like they do change a lot throughout the story, and you see their personalities. And I just love like the I can't remember what her name is, but the boy's name is Kip, and I just adored Kip, and I just didn't want anything bad to happen to him, because you know, this is the kind of story where something could happen to the characters. And so I was just like worried for Kip the whole time, because I just loved him as a character. And yeah, so I just fell in love with the characters, even the people in the house. Like sometimes I think when you have these like, you know, the woman of the house, she could have been the stereotypical, like just kind of looking down on her servants and things like that. And that's how she seemed at first, like she was just going to be gruff and just one-dimensional. But then she also just had so much depth of character to her as we went along, and we learned more about how she ended up at this manor house and stuff like that, and about her relationship with her husband and in the kids and everything. We learn more about them, like as in the kids that are part of this family that owns the manor house. We learn more about them as they go on, so they become more like full characters. So I just really loved everything about this book. Makes me want to read everything that Jonathan Auxier has ever written, since I also really liked Sweep, A Story of a Girl and Her Monster. So yeah, I definitely will be reading more by him, and this has inspired me that I just love middle grade horror, which makes sense because when I was in junior high, that's what I read. I read R.L. Stine, and that's what I was reading in middle grade. So it makes sense that I would still enjoy middle grade horror to this day. So Yes, love this book, 5 stars. And that's it. That was a lot of books. I think in total, like this, I had 13 books, and I think in my mid-month wrap-up, I talked about 10, and then in my like new releases, I talked about 4. So what's that? 27 books. So I read a lot of books this month. I will not be reading that much in April, but you know, middle grade, you can just get through a lot of stuff. So yeah, that's it. If you want to talk about any of these books, I'd love to hear from you down below, and I will talk to you next time. Bye.